right, good. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and enjoying brunch with us this morning. What a treat. We're really pleased you could make it and that the sun has come out and you didn't have to get soaking wet on the way here. So the purpose of today is to stuff our faces with all of these amazing treats. Sylwia, please tell me again the name of these delicious punchkis.
It's plural already, so we don't have S. Punchki.
So much to learn.
Okay,
Do you want to plug the bakery?
Oh yeah, why not? It's excellent Polish bakery in Parliament Street in Leith called Mario Patisserie. Don't ask me why the name, but it's excellent.
Traditional Polish name.
Yeah, because it's easier to pronounce, I suppose. So yeah, nice. Go and support them. They do fantastic stuff.
They've got one more repeat customer, definitely. Typically with something like this, I would spend time introducing Sylwia, but I'm not going to do that because we're going to go right back to the beginning. We've got 2 hours to fill. It'd be much more interesting for you to introduce yourself, so I'm going to sort of stage the questions in such a way that you can do that. We have no screen or projector, as you can see. This is not rehearsed. I have no idea what Sylwia is going to say, and so therefore wouldn't really be able to put a sort of slideshow together to show you. But if there's anything that we mention and you desperately want to see it, there'll be plenty of time at the end to sort of Google things and share interesting pictures and notes. We're going to go through our Q&A, and then I think we'll have a break, time for people to refresh their drinks, grab something more to eat, get some fresh air, whatever it is you want to do, see the exhibition, and then come back, I hope, for some really interesting questions from you guys for Sylwia. So I'm going to dive straight in. A little bit of housekeeping. If you haven't got your phone on silent, please do. You may have noticed.
There will be my mum.
Jason is doing an excellent job of recording this for a podcast episode, which I hope will be the first of many to go out on the subject of photography at Studies in Photography Gallery. And we're also filming this. If anyone has any objections to being on camera, please make yourselves known now. I assure you it will be the backs of your heads only. Which is my worst side, so I'm glad that I'm not in the audience today. Otherwise, we'll dive straight in. Feel free to keep grabbing drinks and cakes and things throughout. I don't think you rustling in the audience is going to necessarily affect our recording here too much. Try not to, spill something or burn yourself. That would be great. Otherwise, help yourself. So, Sylwia, I said we were going to go right back to the beginning. Okay. I really want to know, and we haven't spoken about this previously, how you came to photography. I know that in your background there are other things, other influences, as broad as dance and design. What is it what was that turning moment in your history where you picked up a camera and you realized photography was the thing for you?
It wasn't very early on. Probably the visual arts was kind of first thing when I decided I really don't want to play a piano. And at the time when I was studying the Polish art education work, it's very broad. We specialized, I don't know how it is now, but we specialized very late, which was great. So the MA course is 5 years, and around the third year I was introduced to a photography I wouldn't call it a workshop, photography faculty, and you specialize it on the fifth year. So I went through all the kind of training in a dark room, but what I liked about this course, and it's run by Agata Pankiewicz, she still is running that course, was that photography is not like of course, you need to know all the technical stuff because they will allow you to achieve the results you're after. But the insistence is more about kind of knowledge of the image, knowledge where things are coming from, and also a lot. So basically, it's your photos are as good as the books you're reading. So you kind of have to be a very knowledgeable person. And it's less about kind of tasks given to students, more about the kind of community that you're coming in the morning to the office. you sit down with your coffee, a pastry probably as well, and you have this discussion with your tutor and your fellow students, and like who went to some exhibition, like what book did you read? Oh, and I met this person, or I saw this show, and it's very, very broad. And I think this was and also teaching photography, that photography is not there to record the reality around you. I mean, feel free if you want to do that, that's absolutely fine. But it's more kind of way of expressing yourself. Mm-hmm. And this is what I really like. It really hit home. I went on an Erasmus exchange to Paris, to a very, very commercial school, where Paolo Roversi was teaching photography. I wasn't at this level at all. I had someone lent me the film camera. And obviously I had all these kind of like, oh, there's Robert Duano, there's Eugene Adjet, and there are all these kind of like classical places. And I'm actually in the bloody place where they all shot these images. So that was amazing thrill. But then I came back and I kind of felt like, what I originally thought that I would do, which was lithography, doesn't give me enough kind of satisfaction to kind of work on it for 2 years. I mean, it's interesting technique, and there's a lot of photography used in it. It was used for newspaper printing in 19th century, but the photography was kind of the thing where kind of like, that's what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And that was partially Agata's kind of influence here, because she came to Paris with her daughter, who was 6 at the time, and now is 26 and a very established, famous Polish actress. So it's nice to see that progression. And she kind of like, maybe you should try more into photography, because like if you want to do lithographies, you need to have access to the press, and unless you have your own workshop, it's not that easy to make a living. Like maybe you should become a photographer. And it was just nagging and nagging and nagging. So in the end, that's what I did.
And this is Krakow. What about before then? I had no idea that was going to do that.
That was a train, but that's our coffee or tea break.
We're going to just power through over that, I think. Before Krakow, before your sort of more formal studies, before your introduction to a broader art history, what did life look like? What were the creative influences? Maybe you weren't even aware of them. Maybe you are now in retrospect. Mm-hmm. What do you think are the things that shaped your early life, even your childhood, that led you to a creative path?
I think I was very lucky to be brought up in a home I was brought up. I was actually thinking about it recently, that actually the where is this fascination with paper and the collage started. And I remember this incident from my childhood when my dad, who was an engineer, he got these German catalogs of various machinery for road building. And you wouldn't see colorful, nice print on glossy paper like that in Poland. I mean, there were colorful magazines, but there was not the kind of that level of printing. And I remember taking these catalogs and kind of like, tearing out the best machines or cutting them out. And I think I never seen my dad as livid in his whole life. It was the only time when he absolutely lost it, to the extent that I had to run to the bathroom and lock myself. And he was so angry that he picked the lock, and when he opened it, it was like, okay, whatever. It's like, you tore it, so there's nothing I can do. So that was the first incident. And then someone came over to see the show, and we started chatting. Why is this bird influence? Why these birds? And I completely kind of like wiped it out from my memory, which is actually very funny, because this is what the Lethe series is talking about this kind of fragmentation of memories, or maybe like selecting them and kind of like subconsciously pushing some of the memories away. And my parents got from someone a pair of budgerigars. So it's this blue bird that is in a picture there. And for whatever reason, because my dad never done things by half, he suddenly ended up with 30 battery carriers to the extent that he had to like build the aviary on a balcony, and it was intense. At some point, my mom put her foot down. She's like, no, I can't be woken up every single day at 5:30. And so they kind of like gave them to friends, and probably some of them just like died of old age. But I remember there was one budgie that I was very fond of, and I remember coming back from primary school one day, and my mom said like, oh, I have some really sad news, like, your favorite budgie, I think his name was Nopsik. He died, but the thing she didn't tell me, and only I learned years later, that I don't know if the bird sensed that their pal he was older age, or he had some disability. They basically pecked him to death, and I was never told. Yes, and this kind of memory of this came back to me when James commented on the picture there. And I was like, oh yeah, of course, there was this incident in my childhood. So you kind of like, you suppress all these memories and they somehow come to the surface. So yeah, if you buy your child a badgeriger, kind of tell them that they have very short lives, or a hamster. Yeah,
I'm going to try not to digress. I want to stay focused on your early years, but it's so fascinating to see that full circle for you now to be producing work which so clearly references some very early memories, maybe even earliest memories. And I see this now time and time again, examples of just how long it can take for us as adult practitioners to kind of get back in touch with some of those very early influences. It's almost like a reconciliation of your entire time, your entire experience, going back to what are some of the earliest things that I can remember, and then portraying them through art. I think some of the most powerful visual references come out of that, and it's fascinating to be surrounded by a room full of them now and hear you talk about that. I certainly, remember some of my early conversations with my parents about art, which was probably easier for me than perhaps others. My father was an artist and a head of Warrington Art College. My mother was one of his students. And so art was kind of in our family, and I guess probably maybe we were encouraged to think in a certain way when we were growing up. What was that dialogue like for you at home? Was it a creative home? Did you have conversations with your family? It's kind of
half-half, because as I mentioned, my dad was an engineer, but he always was very good at drawing. So when I finally managed to ditch the piano, I moved into drawing. And my mum, she used to be a professional ballet dancer, and then she kind of decided that maybe the ballerina career is a little bit too much, especially if you want to have a family, and she kind of shifted more into art management and choreographing stuff, and she was always very good working with kids. That's her kind of where she excels, I think. So there were always this conversation whenever we were traveling. They were always like, oh, let's visit this castle, or let's visit this gallery, or let's go to this museum. So this conversation was always there, and I think it's important to say that before I started in visual arts, I have a very strong background in history of arts, because this has always fascinated me. Like, how do people create work? What are the kind of circumstances that make them create work or stop creating work? And obviously now the discussion is much more advanced, I think, because we have way more access to all the kind of archival materials to kind of see how people's art career progresses. So I think this background in a history of art is important, because I think it led to another thing which I'm very vocal about, is about not using any third-party material. And also all the images that you see, I even brought one here to show you. So all the images used in the collages are the images taken in a for this series, in a taxidermy collection. For that series, it's all the images from my own archive. and then they're being rephotographed in a kind of like a new ways. So I never kind of, it will be probably easier to find a skull, I think that's crocodile, to find a crocodile somewhere online, but it's a great fun to go with, to pack your studio setup and go to a collection and set things up and kind of see what they have in various drawers and set it up and photograph it to the way I know how I can use it later on in a work.
And there's a very particular color palette that comes with your work and a very particular use of light, which I think comes from your studio practice, which couldn't be emulated through finding means online or I hope also through AI. I mean, who's to say, but you know.
I should probably do an experiment, like please come up with the collage and Kowalczyk style. I haven't tried that yet, but I guess that's...
My limited experience would tell you that you get a different color every time, despite telling it the same color. I think there's some way to go yet.
Yeah, I mean, you have to learn what kind of prompts, I suppose, you kind of want in that case,
early museum, gallery visits, heritage sites. I mean, certainly for me, this is where there was a light bulb moment. I mean, I remember studying general art and design in high school, and the difficult thing about high school is that if you pay attention, there are hormones involved, definitely. But if you find a subject that you like and you pay attention and you engage and you digest things, then generally the teachers want to be encouraging, rightly so. So I found myself in my general art and design course drawing away happily and being encouraged, and that felt fantastic. But what they don't tell you is if you're terrible at it until further on in your education. So then I arrive at college, I decide, art is the thing that I want to do. My dad can do it, my brother's a designer, you know, let's do this. And suddenly get this huge shock when I realize I can't draw for toffee. And they'll tell you at college, you know, they're very careful in high school. No.
Because they will tell you straight away.
They'll tell you probably in a more polite way, but they'll still tell you. And so I had this dilemma, you know, I'm committed to studying art now, but what do I do? I have to find my way. And, you know, as you might imagine, I became very interested in abstract expressionism. And
I'm a fan too.
Of course, going to, I remember a trip to Tate Liverpool to see the likes of Robert Rauschenberg, Rothko, some of the lesser known, I suppose, British expressionists that Tate was so good at showing at that time. I remember falling in love with Anthony Tapies, just incredible. But I remember one particular painting that I created in college, which was so out there, it shows the lengths to which I was trying to distance myself from drawing. I remember it genuinely had a pair of hair straighteners punched through the middle of this painting to be as abstract and as
very
weird as possible.
I think,
very Rauschenberg. Anyway, it wasn't going well until I discovered, I remember actually at Tate Liverpool, a very small display of the photographs by Anna Gaskell, who we don't see much of these days, but during the 90s and early 2000s, she was, you know, sort of Guggenheim star. Her series, which is all responding to Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, and the sort of the angst of teenage femininity, portraying that in a very cinematic sense, just bang, you know, I saw that and I thought I'd never seen anything like it. That then led to Cindy Sherman, Gregory Crewdson, and I sort of realized that photography could be this big cinematic thing. And it didn't have to necessarily be a document of what was around us. You know, you could use your imagination to create something entirely new, and that really, for me, sort of opened the door and made me realize I wanted to pick up.
Because I know you're very interested in Czech and Slovak photography. Maybe not super contemporary stuff. I don't know. Maybe that too. But you kind of started your research in surrealism era photography from that area in Europe.
RA Group, Czech surrealist photographers, very interesting, and artists, and actually I would say probably, you know, a very underrepresented brand of surrealism across Europe. We will come back to that.
Okay.
Who was your Anna Gaskell?
Oh, the big revelation. I think I can't like pinpoint exact moment and one name. I think because generally I look very little into photography, I must say. It's maybe because it's the history of art background. I much more look into painters, maybe installation artists. So like when you started mentioning abstract expressionists, then like the scale of it, I think it kind of like triggers something in your brain that like, oh, okay, I can also do big things. I'm not Cy Twombly with the palazzo in whatever Rome or Florence, but it's a really nice option to kind of see that other people are doing it, and it kind of encourages you to do that. So I can't really. It will probably come back to me, but at the moment, I can't point out exact name.
That makes a lot of sense, seeing your work,
Although no,
abstraction.
I have a name. I have a name now. I kind of think of it, and he's actually Slovak. It's a Slovak photographer called Miroš Volik, and if you Google him, I think he is a Guggenheim Fellowship recipient. So he was in America for a while. But I saw his work because the Agata Pankiewicz's class had very strong connection with the photo festival in Bratislava, and because this kind of like a new wave of Czech and Slovakian photography was very, it's early 2000s, so these guys are in their prime then, so they're being shown at various events, and seeing Miro's world he created was suddenly something that I kind of thought like, yeah, this is the photography I want to use. So the camera is just the kind of way of recording it, but it's the artist who creates what's in front of a camera. I mean, his work is very rooted in surrealism. I think you were like, but it's a kind of like a modern take on surrealism. So it doesn't have any kind of references to, eyes being cut and things like this, and dream states. I don't think it's more kind of the way of being, the kind of like a fun you have in your life, you kind of noticing, and being brought up in Poland in 1980s and 1990s. That's a very specific environment, and I think a lot in Polish or that part of Europe, thinking about photography especially, comes from the fact that like if you record what you have around you, you're just getting very depressed. So you need to create something that kind of steps out of that kind of, I wouldn't kind of quite call it misery. It was exciting time in some way, the kind of political changes happening and the country opening itself to the world, but still the limitations with that. And I think the artists kind of creating their own worlds, I think that's the strongest point.
I think it is a very particular, as I say, brand of surrealism or avant-garde photography, which perhaps is unique to Eastern Europe. And I think actually, to an extent, unique to Poland as well. There's a unique view on the approach to surrealism and photography there. And it's something to do with the sort of new modernist landscape. It's an interpretation of something that Edward Weston introduced, but with a Gothic flair. It's
and on a shoestring.
Yeah, and on a shoestring. A lot of folklore sort of tuned into that, and there are some essences of, I guess, more traditional surrealist tropes, but it's its own brand, 100%.
I think the name, they kind of like the only person I can think of that is kind of like clearly surrealism, but surrealist influenced is Edward Krasiński. So it's the artist who basically kind of like his whole life is the artwork, which is fantastic dedication. So even when he kind of goes on holiday with his family, he gets this idea that I think his daughter is at the time about like 1 meter 60 centimeters tall, and he gets this idea of this blue tape that he will put around everything that is exactly her height. So maybe she's a little bit, maybe there's a very specific measurement, I can't remember how high it goes exactly, but he goes and put this bloody blue tape through everything, including people in the room. So everyone kind of ends up with the stripe, which kind of saves his bacon in a way when he's invited to an exhibition in Japan. And all his work travels for this museum show in a container. And for whatever reason, being weather or the custom duties, it doesn't arrive on time. So he kind of has this idea, okay, I have this blue tape. So he basically kind of tapes over all the objects in the room, in this museum room that the curators planned for him. And that's the show, which I kind of think it's, when you look at the archival images from 1960s of it, it's so simple and so genius in the idea.
Absolute genius. I mean, as somebody who produces exhibitions as you know, part of what I do, the idea of always having an exhibition in your back pocket as a plan B
String works well.
is very clever. Well, let's talk about your process. We've spoken a little bit about it already. I love that reference to the, magazines during your childhood, tearing those up, finding the imagery.
Don't remind me.
But can we just walk through it? Because I think first impressions for most people seeing this work would be, okay, so here is an artist who's collected imagery together. And that we know that that's absolutely not the case. So
Not exactly the case.
what does that look like? How do you find the objects, the subjects, the things that are going to be in your photographs? How do you decide what goes in, what goes out? And also, how much of your time do you spend just photographing eggs? We want to know.
Eggs are good, and there's a huge variety of them. So I'll be probably doing it for a while still. So maybe we should start with the lithy, because this kind of, it's a natural progression to what's the rest happening in the work, and I'm kind of like moving away from the human presence more and more. To the extent that probably the next series I'll probably end up with a landscape, which is kind of like not very me at all, and like a big respect to landscape photographers, because this is hard. Like doing landscape well is a hard thing to do. So I started with the portraits here. And basically we moved from Kraków, so my husband and I, we moved to Scotland. And the first thing I noticed, while being based in Scotland, that people here look very different from Eastern Europeans. When you look at the paintings, again, like if you have a little bit of a kind of history of art knowledge, so when you look at big portrait painters, not only in Britain, but like obviously I'm based in Britain, so I'm kind of looking at all the, especially Baroque, where the British art starts, the portraiture starts to kind of take over, or even Scottish ones, portrait painters like Henry Raeburn. You kind of notice the type of people is very different, and then you notice it sitting in your local pub, like, oh my God, they look exactly the same, they just wear contemporary clothes. So that was an amazing revelation, and I would stalk my fellow students of the Edinburgh College of Art in the college library. So whenever I went there to kind of dig through the books and I spotted someone who looked like, oh, that would work great for this project, I would approach them, and people were very welcoming, and they were like, yeah, sure, I come to the studio. I had like a little studio space in the college. I didn't use the big kind of big lights because I also like to work very fast. So there was kind of like a balcony that it was only us postgraduates and the animation department that this room was part of were using, but it was used as a storage space, and I felt like, oh, but it has all these north-facing windows, and it has this beautiful diffused light that you see in portraiture. So I asked is it okay if I move the whatever boxes were stuck there, and they said, yeah, sure, fine. And I set up the studio space there, and people would be coming. And I think the fact that to kind of like mask all the mess in the background, I put up a big paper backdrop, and I think Colorama doesn't make that color anymore, because when I then scanned the negatives to kind of bring it back to the color of the background being what it was, it made the skin colors a little bit different from what it was, and they were kind of, I wouldn't say ghostly pale, but there was something kind of otherworldly in a skin tone that would happen if I brought back that background color to what it was. And I actually liked that effect very much. And then the series kind of went on to be very successful after I graduated, and it was in lots of museum shows, and it's now in museum collections. But then I had all these portrait shoots. I had all this archive of all these people, mainly back of the head. So don't underestimate the back of the heads. That I thought I could use, but I didn't want necessarily their identity. Kind of like the identity wasn't really that important. So I think the only kind of work pretty much in the series that where you can recognize is my friend Rio Tamura here. And she's actually sitting with a big sheet of blue torn paper that has this tear in front, so her face just like kind of sticks from behind this, and then I laid it over with the landscape on top.
This image here, so what we're seeing was all taken live in one shot. So the subject is there. The backdrop has become something that is in front, and
yes.
Then the landscape image is there.
That's later.
That's later.
So the Rio is with her blue sheet of paper is printed, and it's actually quite a small print. And then I felt like, okay, we need to add some kind of interest. Actually, it happened. So by this stage, I graduated, and by this stage also we had quite a serious health issues. Basically, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and so we kind of had to put everything aside and kind of tend to that. So that was very intense time in the family life, the 2 years. So she's in a middle image. And I'm actually very grateful I did the photo shoot with both my parents-in-law for the original series. And so if you're photographing your family members, do it, because it kind of, maybe it's not that important at the time when you know, like I remember my father-in-law was very upset at the fact that he had this beautiful tweed jacket and he had a little red comb, and this red comb just peeked from his pocket. And when he saw the pictures, like, it's all very nice, and yeah, I really like it. But like, why did you leave this red comb? Like, this is like, I would push it down. Like, you should have told me. I should have pushed it down. But it actually makes the whole image, because all the tones are so subtle. And then there's this, like in this famous Turner painting, there's this dot of red, which kind of makes it. And so yeah, so it was a very, very funny story. But I think after this intense time, where I wasn't creating anything, there is some kind of moment where you need some kind of release. Being it creative, people start gardening or whatever, but there has to be some kind of release. And in my case, this release was in the images. So I was going through the archive, and I was thinking, like, it's a shame there's like 3 rolls of negative here, and I can only use 1 image in a series, but there are so many other good portraits which maybe don't work on their own as portraits, but they would work as a whole when combined with something else. And obviously Scotland, moving here, the landscape is very different. So the landscape is an influence. I think before moving to Scotland, I was always like a city person. So like holidays would be always like going to a big city, Paris, London, Madrid. There would never be kind of like the urge of going to a countryside. And suddenly when we moved to Scotland, there was this huge urge of escaping to the countryside. So there's this kind of like a lure of the landscape in there.
Which I think captures the passing of time within the imagery. I mean, would I be right in saying that some of these works were photographed in more than one country, effectively? Even though you're looking at one image, you're looking at different time zones, different places.
I'm coming back between Britain and Poland, so I think the landscape, the bottom part of the landscape in Rio's picture is, and actually the top one as well, is the winter in Poland, when you kind of go and there's this Mazovian landscape. that apparently Chopin liked very much. That it was just like a flat, but it's a little bit boring. So we kind of need some kind of interest in the. And occasionally, kind of like spot some interesting building, or in the summer, it's like, oh my God, there's a stork, you know, and like your whole outlook changes because there's something live in the.
But there's a real honesty there to not necessarily making the work in the moment, but allowing it to sort of develop over time. You know, take an image, you may come back to it in a year's time when there is something else relevant to be added in, when you've experienced something. That captures a lot of, as you say, what your work is about for me, which is about memory, our interpretation of our own memories, of collective memories.
Oh, here we go.
Right on time. I try not to say anything important whilst that's happening, in case this part needs to be edited out. If anyone needs to cough or sneeze,
now it's
the
your
time
moment
to do it. It's quite unique. It's very unique as an approach to photography, and I can see that has come from some of your earlier influences, your early education as photography, less as a means to an end, but as a platform for conversation, for discussion, for communication, a more abstract tool altogether. This is the full circle that we were talking about earlier. We've spoken a bit about Lethe. So the other series that's represented in this exhibition, Metamorphosis, clear nod to Victorian cabinets of curiosity, this obsession with natural history, collecting, perhaps reappropriating. Can you tell us a bit more about where that came from? Was there research involved?
I think this, again, like the influence is the move to Scotland, because as I say, when we lived in Poland, and wherever I lived in Poland, I always lived in a city centre, and there's not, apart from pigeons, there's really not that much, I mean, there are lots of interesting things I learned about pigeons while working on this series, so don't diss the pigeons. But I think the fact that you can kind of go out into the countryside and this kind of like living beings are everywhere around you, and some of the species that I never seen maybe outside of visiting a zoo, that was a revelation to me. And also I think the fact that, again, like people who you meet in your trajectory are kind of influencing you. So my good friend at the time, she's basically a professional taxidermist, and there was always an interest in the, I don't know, maybe it's a very specifically Polish thing that you always, whenever you go to a cemetery and you can like look. You don't think that, kind of like, I think the whole nation celebrates the past and celebrates death way too much, which I do not agree. There's a lot of martyrology going on in Polish history, in the Polish psyche. I think we're a very traumatized nation, but there is a little bit of that you kind of want to, something good has to come out of the kind of ultimate thing that will happen to all of us. And the taxidermy to me was kind of like a way of preserving all these beautiful objects that are not alive anymore, but they don't have to be kind of completely discarded. They can have another purpose. Obviously, when you start to look at a kind of all the Victorian collections and all the kind of, even the concept of national parks, there's a lot of unfairness in there, and there's a lot of forcing your opinions on other people who maybe have different ones. So the complication is definitely there. So it's not a clear cut, but this fact that you can kind of photograph these animals without actually spending 12 hours in the field to being able to capture them was kind of definitely like a shortcut for me. So therefore, the idea of going to collections. So when my friend moved out of Edinburgh and I couldn't access her collection anymore, I spoke with the zoology department of the Edinburgh Uni, and they allow us to. So I'm saying us because it was me and Simon who had to unpack all the little tiny parrots from their plastic bags. We were allowed access to that collection. I'll be eternally grateful for this, because it was very special, the kind of seeing all these amazing animals, but not being have to be in a jungle. It makes life easier.
It also takes photography right back to its beginning,
Yeah.
its connections with natural history.
Yeah.
Photography as a tool in order to capture nature. We can really credit the existence of photography as we know it to that. Is there an awareness there? Are you channeling William Henry Fox Talbot in your pictures?
No, not really. More like Mr. Booth and his museum in Brighton, and he was the first one who kind of like set up all these animals, which he unfortunately shot as well himself. He set up all these dioramas and kind of like make this whole what we would now contemporarily call installations. So putting these animals, which is mind-boggling because they so often are not even from the same geographical area, but he kind of like, oh, you're the same color, so he kind of puts them in. So I think there is a little bit of that in the color palette, the use of a color palette, that's kind of creating this Victorian idea of okay, I have all these animals, I can create something of my own and kind of bring this out to the world, which has a lot of ethical implication in itself.
Tension is evident in all of your work, which I think also connects the work back to surrealism. Maybe it's a nice opportunity to start talking about that as a subject, because surrealism is sort of born out of tension, out of conflict, out of difficult times, social upheaval. And we are sort of living in that today to a different extent and in different ways, but there is this tension, so much positivity to come out of where we're at in terms of scientific, technological, social advances, but also the fear of the political landscape, environmental landscape, conflict, war. Surrealism really is there, I suppose, to help us navigate those times. Is that what you're doing in your work? Is that how you channel surrealism
I think it's very subconscious because obviously there is the huge economic upheaval and the political upheaval, and I think that's very present because like even thinking of what is the Trump administration currently doing with the national parks and all these stories of all these people being deported and then their pets being left to their own devices, and kind of like people don't think about it. And obviously also the influence of AI. So I want to mention the book by Sadia Qureshi, which is called The Extinction, where she talks about the basically startups working towards recreating like a woolly mammoth or a dodo bird, but no one kind of thinks that maybe when you already have $10 billion startup, maybe you should also think about how about all the other animals that haven't been extinct yet? Maybe they need some protection. And I think this kind of discussion with AI, with a kind of, will the animal be intellectual property? And if so, whose is this intellectual property belong to? Is it the company or is it the whole of humanity? I think this discussion needs to happen because with the way that we're going, we're gonna be, like us rats and maybe the pigeons will be the only animals that kind of are left behind. So that's kind of what intrigues me, and also the whole kind of until I moved to Scotland, I didn't realize any kind of implication of the colonial power that kind of had its influence on the natural world. So the image which is in the light boxes behind is inspired by the, probably some of you may know, is this very famous image of the mountain of bison skulls. And there's a very tiny man standing on top of that mountain. I think it's in a Detroit National Library collection, this image from like late 19th century. And it just shows the sheer scale of the abuse that these animals and the natural world and the people who were originally inhabiting North America had to go through. But it's just like organized thing, which I really like about the animal kingdom is the fact that the cruelty is never planned there. okay, my budgerigar was pegged to death, but the fellow birds, but I don't think that was arranged. Well, the cruelty in the human world, it's abounded, and it's usually very well planned and meticulously executed, which I think animals just don't have that. It just happens in the world.
And up until now, it's not a level playing field, but the animal kingdom has some independence until we claim their copyright.
But you kind of like have to put yourself in the mindset of a person who thinks that they go to a national park and they can pat the bison. I don't know where this strength of the humans kind of can go to, but at the same time, like we Victorians invented the Wardian case that allowed them to move all the species from different parts of the world to kind of environments that were maybe not originally planned for them, but it's certainly nowadays it's a obvious discussion, good discussion to have, because like we look at the rhododendron and we always think, okay, it's always been there, but obviously that's not the case, and several other invasive species. So
it's history repeating itself to an extent. I've always been fascinated with the magnolia. You can imagine the dinosaurs wandering around, magnolias everywhere. You look at them and they're still here.
Well, if you release the chickens among the magnolias, you kind of get the vibe, because they are basically the direct inheritance of the dinosaurs. The closest link we have. So
it's a strange comfort that there are some things that are just unchangeable.
Just the scale.
Long live the magnolia. So we've looked at these works and we've spoken about politics, about surrealism, about animal welfare. I've heard, anecdotally since the exhibition has been open, some very contrasting ideas from looking at the work. Some people look at these and find them hilarious. There's an absurdity to it, which again is a surrealist trope, but a humor, a silliness. Others have looked at these works and have been horrified. Are they there to be interpreted, or are they there to instill a particular message?
I think they definitely invite for discussion, and I think the more discussion and the more we educate ourselves what are the issues with how we cohabit the planet with other species, I think it's important. So if I can introduce this kind of dialogue, because there are lots of things that I'm by any means, I'm not a kind of activist that chain themselves to a radiator. That's not my style of going about things. It's more kind of subtly educating or supporting charities or kind of doing some volunteering work, and I think that's the way to do it, because if we kind of like have to take on a multi-billion-dollar startup that is thinking about bringing woolly mammoth back, then like obviously as an individual you're never going to win. But I think there's so many things to do, and there's a huge discussion about the role of zoos, for example, nowadays. Like, are they good? Are they bad? Like, I guess it depends what kind of purpose they serving and how they managed. But it's a deep discussion, and I think it needs to happen, because I think it's important also politically as well.
And we've got some, I suppose, what you could interpret as portraiture here, perhaps some landscape. Studio practice is very evident, still life. Where do you see metamorphosis, for example, and other work developing in the future? You've mentioned you're more comfortable in the studio. Are you staying there? Are you traveling?
I hope I am. I hope I am staying in the studio. That's definitely my happy place. So I'm kind of endless fiddling, preferably accompanied by a small dachshund. So that's always good. But I think the next, I already started working. The next thing, I think I kind of jokingly mentioned the landscape, but the next subject that really is kind of maybe not close to my heart, but it kind of like directly is touching me and who I am as a person, is being transplanted from my culture to a different culture. In fact, being an immigrant. Despite it's being for 2 decades in Scotland, but this kind of not being fully submerged here, because people will constantly ask like, oh, where's your accent from, or like, how do you pronounce your name and things like this, but also not being anymore in my home country that I left 20 years ago. And I'm obviously still following like what's happening in the Polish politics and what's happening in the Polish culture and things like this, but it's not kind of something that I can confidently say that I know everything about. I mean, I know lots because I'm following it, but there are certain things that kind of like drop off my radar, and I'm not aware of it. But at the same time, if you follow the Polish politics all the time, you would just drive yourself mad. So it's not the maybe it's good to have like, oh, okay, I can move now to the Scottish subjects, leave the Polish ones behind. But I think the landscape will come back there.
Politically engaged landscapes is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and it's a story of Odysseus. I know that Mr. Nolan already kind of is working on his project, but I started 5 years before him. But I think now this project is kind of like ready to, because what fascinates me in Odysseus is the fact that you don't really know if all these stories really happened to him, or has he invented them? Because in Odyssey, you only hear him talking about them. There's never kind of relay of someone else mentioning what happened to him. So I kind of need to know, like, where again, and it brings us back to the Lethe series. Where do you fabricate the memories, and what's the mechanism and need for it there?
Yeah, how much can we trust our own memories?
Yeah, I didn't remember the budgie. I kind of like wiped it off my memory.
They're not gone. They come back. All you need is a trigger. This might trigger some memories. You knew I was going to ask you this question. It's the only pre-planned. I've given you some time to think about it. I think it would be a nice one to close on. If you could have anybody visit this exhibition here on William Street, living or dead, famous or not, no one's going to judge you if you say Paul Mescal. It could be anyone. Well, now you mention it. Give us a name. Tell us why.
I mean, the first person that came to my mind, obviously, is my dad. I really would like to know what he thinks about it. And also, kind of, I would love to have this discussion because he was very passionate about animal welfare. And this was his kind of, he loved his garden, and it was this submersion in nature was definitely his thing, which I now appreciate. I couldn't totally understand this concept when I was a teenager, and I had to go to the garden with him because he needed to kind of, trim some plants because this is the month when we do this. And I was like, oh, Jesus, I'll be here for 3 hours while he's kind of like talking to all his fruit trees and things like this. But I definitely understand this way more. So I quite like to know, have this discussion with him what he would think about this approach now. And kind of probably we would end up digging the allotment together. And the second person, maybe because I like the way of the thinking about art, and it again like brings us back to the surrealism, is Marcel Duchamp, because his way of thinking about art and what is art in the first place. Although I think I'm very too traditional for him, doing things in like 2 dimensions and printing them on things going up on a wall. That would be good. And maybe Edward Krasiński, like if I could get these 3 in the room, that we would have a good discussion. I think probably would end up with a blue tape. But I think that would be a good discussion.
What do you think your dad would say to Marcel Duchamp?
He would probably find some way of helping him out with the what's the name of this big piece in the glass? Yes, yeah, that's the one which got smashed accidentally, and now don't want to touch it and repair it. So he'd probably find some way how to do it because he was ingenious. I wouldn't know if it was very health and safety his idea he would have, but I'm sure he would find a way.
Duchamp's fabricator. I love
Exactly.
it. Great. Okay, so I'm sure you are all itching to ask Sylwia some questions. So my role here is to repeat your questions so that we capture them on the podcast episode. So that's exactly what I'll do. Raise hands, is that? There we go. Go ahead.
Well, congratulations on the show, Sylwia, and also there was wonderful discussion before the break, and I just wondered if we could pick up on, if you could take us into the studio now with you and tearing sheets and just talk us through that process and what it feels like for you, like when do you start, when do you begin, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, we were chatting about it. Oh.
Tell us what your time in this studio looks like from start to finish, please.
That's much more succinctly put.
Okay, I'm a person who collects a lot of notebooks. So I have like whole shelf of beautiful ECA black square notebooks. I'm saying ECA because you can buy them at the College of Art shop. Highly recommend. Great quality of paper, very tactile, pleasant to deal with. And then I put all these kind of ideas in there, things that kind of like trigger some kind of response from me. And then when I need to refer back, some ideas already have in my head, but sometimes I need to refer back to these notebooks. And then in the studio is the kind of like process starts. Usually it's nothing, as my father-in-law used to say, nothing spurs you on to action as a looming deadline. So, so that's the best thing about it. And then the work starts, and I think we were discussing that unlike probably many people, I can't listen to anything anymore because the process of working on this is so intense. Because I kind of have to have pretty much the reference library ready in my head all the time. So it's kind of like, like when you have this fan in a computer that goes shh. So I have something like this in my head that it doesn't kind of allow for anything else to kind of participate in this concentration process. So very, very seldom I kind of, we have some kind of like a, I don't know, Baroque opera seems to be good. Oh, Beastie Boys, nothing in between. It's always this type of soundtrack, but that's happening very, very seldom. And then the process begins. So I kind of have boxes and boxes of the printed material, or if I kind of think, oh yeah, there was this image of armadillo that I had from different angles, so then I have to go, plug all the archive discs and kind of find it and print it on a studio printer that kind of allows me to do this. If I need a bigger like backdrop or something, then I need to plan ahead and speak with my printers who are gonna print it bigger than A2. And then sometimes it's turned, sometimes it's cut and reassembled. I kind of do these little, like a mini theater sets almost, you can say, because, oh, hello, he's back. Almost like a theater set, so things are done in layers. And I quite like sometimes keeping the distance between these layers so the light shines through, so it's never kind of just two-dimensional things. But sometimes I simplify, so like the green pieces are very, very simple setups, just kind of like basically game almost between pink and green, and how it's gonna lay out on a page. Does it satisfy your question? And then of course it's all rephotographed, so it's all reproduced, and thank for the advent of a digital cameras, so you don't have to use a Polaroid and wave it and check if it's all right. You see pretty much straight away. I mean, there's obviously some kind of calculation because I work with a Mamiya RB67, so like the lens on my Sony has f22, but Mamiya has 45. So like if I which I don't often use, but it's usually kind of somewhere in the middle of the range of the lens, but kind of it allows me to capture enough depth of field, so it kind of looks plausible. And if there isn't enough depth of field, it's usually all right, because there's some kind of fall off at some point in the scene. But I think it makes it more real.
It's worth saying, from my very, very short stint as a jewelry photographer,
Jesus, that's
but sometimes photographing something on a flat plane is the hardest thing to do of all, you know, to get that absolutely pin sharp, no refractions where you don't want them. It's a skill.
I think what we didn't mention here, that I have, so Simon and I, we run a thriving commercial practice. And I think the fact that we have commercial practice and we've been faced with technical issues many times. I mean, here at least I'm working with a matte paper, I don't have any reflections. But the fact that we're working with this kind of allows us to sort and solve lots of issues even way before they happen, because I know how to tackle them. And I think it's invaluable source of knowledge, because the deadlines, you kind of have to sort it out. But it helps my personal work, because I have this idea and I know how to execute it. And I think if I didn't have the technical knowledge, I would be very limited by this. And also the fact that if I have some issues that I don't know how to sort it, I can always ask my husband, and he usually has some kind of idea how to sort it, or he knows how to do it, and that's invaluable.
But you're weaving 3D objects in as well. So
oh yeah, that's a kind of like a latest. That's a good point, Simon. That among the paper ones starts to appear the 3D ones. I don't know how many of you noticed. There's like in a blue work either in the back. There's like a blue stone with a poppy seed flower on top, and this is the actual stone. So again, like playing that there's that one plane which is paper, and then some objects are raised and some objects are distanced. Then it's
you spray painted the stone, so it's blue.
yeah, but it's actually the fun fact: the spray painted stone was from a client's work, and I kind of felt like, oh, this blue will work nicely. So yeah, because I mean, this is another problem working with a studio. You kind of keep stuff because they may always come useful. I don't know if it's the kind of Eastern European thing that like you mustn't waste anything. And that's why keeping this archive and keeping all the gadgets, you know, at some point, like we will need to do a clear out, let's face it. But at the moment, I'm kind of enjoying the fact that I have all these sources of for the photographs in a studio. We also have a fridge, we can keep eggs. I mean, this is also an Eastern European thing. We keep eggs in the fridge.
Eggshells.
And eggshells.
Multiple uses, absolutely. Keep the slugs away from your garden.
Oh yeah,
bees.
well, I don't have a garden, so I don't really know, but it's a useful bit of intel for the
box.
Listeners of the podcast.
Okay, very good. Good stuff, I think. Anyone else? Burning questions? Robert?
Can I ask my question?
Go for it.
In the current edition of Studies in Photography, available at the desk, but there is an excellent article by Alex about Sylwia's work, and some lovely visuals as well, so that's worth looking at. Also in the same edition, and I think it's great, is an article about Polish photographer Zofia Rydet. I mean, I always, as everyone in Poland would know about Zofia Rydet, mainly through her sociological record, an amazing project from 70s onwards. But before I saw an exhibition in Krakow, I didn't know that she had also done a project called The World of Feelings and Imagination, which essentially is, there's common ground there, I think, in terms of her sometimes surrealist photo collages using her own photographs. And I just wondered if, I just thought, well, it's amazing they're both there together. Could you just talk about maybe some common ground or inspiration or what you think of her work?
I'm a big fan of Sylwia Kowalczyk's work. I don't know this piece that well, so I'll be very happy to learn more about it from studies in photography. But she's a well-known classic, and I think the fact that although our working methods are a bit different, I mean, I understand why she had to work the way she worked, being a bit ruthless towards her subjects.
Yeah.
I'm always I'm in a camp of kind of make your subject kind of work with you rather than kind of try to get some kind of antagonism to work for a better result, because the photograph is the ultimate goal.
But it's interesting because I think, as I understand it, she had worked with her brother in kind of non-professional camera societies and on the art photography side, and this project was really done before she started the main body of the sociological record work, and so it's quite interesting, I think, just to
I think also where we differ with Zofia Rydet is that she's very much a collector. And despite the fact that I have boxes of torn prints, I don't have the kind of it's not the collecting is not the goal here. I think, because in her work you can kind of see that she likes collecting this, and she's kind of like plowing through all these ideas to kind of collect them in like moving from one to the next, and it's almost kind of collecting is the main goal rather than kind of the any connection with a subject. But these early works, the kind of like a dream state. It's true. It's very different from. I saw it many years ago as a kind of introduction to the zapis socjologiczny work, when she went to people's houses. Basically, she kind of like invited herself in. She didn't kind of ask for permission. They would just open the door, and she was like, "Oh, you have some lovely table there, so I'll just like, I'll come and photograph it. Would you sit here?" And then she would basically, she was this kind of lovely elderly lady that no one kind of wouldn't object, because he looked like your granny, and she kind of totally milked it, this image, to get the results she was after. So.
Thanks, Sylwia, and please forgive my shameless plug for studies in photography.
I know we like studies here, so.
For the sake of the recording, I'm going to repeat Robin's question, so retrospectively. We're going back in time now. Can you tell us a little bit about Sylwia Rydet and any influence that she might have had on your work? Except don't. I didn't have the luxury of seeing that exhibition in Krakow, but I did see some installation photographs, and one thing that I noticed is that in the exhibition they have the maquettes, the sort of cut out 3D elements that she produced as part of her photographs, which it strikes me there is a crossover there. But do you also have 3D versions of some of your photographs that you would ever share with the world? Is there a sculptural aspect to your work in the future?
I think it's gonna be moving like this. The idea with the Odysseus is very much kind of going back to the Victorian theatre, like children theatre sets. I think that's where it's heading at the moment. I mean, ultimately, I think for me the finished product, in inverted commas, always be a print. So I'm not. Even when I did the kind of immersive installation, so like the previous series, that I did with the papier-mâché sculptures, it was never intended to be the kind of installation. That would be just like impossible to show unless it's kind of like site-specific. So the documenting it as a finished product, which is the 2D print, I think it's always going to be my preferred way of doing things, but I also quite like the fact that things can get more sculptural. And because I use paper, I don't have the stress that it's either expensive or it's gonna fall apart. It's paper, let's face it. But I don't have the stress like people. So, like for example, very well-known Polish sculptor Alina Szapocznikow, who worked with resins in 1970s, like where technology was just coming up. Now, 50 years down the line, the curators are pulling the hair out of their heads because everything is basically crumbling, and these sculptures and installations are so fragile and sensitive that it's basically showing her work is kind of impossible. But also, fun fact about her, she also worked with photography because her second husband, Roman Cieślewicz, was a graphic designer. He actually designed the Elle magazine logo, so that's a fun Polish plug here for you. And she cooperated with him on a series of photos. She basically had the chewing gum, and she would put the chewing gum on this kind of arranged like a ledge of something, and he would help her to photograph it. So I think it's the only piece of work which is in 2 dimensions from her, but it's actually so refreshing. And there's some very clever title, which sadly I don't remember now. We can probably put it in the show notes if someone wants to find it. But it's so funny and so hilarious and so surreal because it's a chewing gum, but it looks like a sculpture. The way how it's photographed, you have no idea about the scale of it. And only by reading the fact that she used a chewing gum, you kind of like, oh, okay, so these are tiny, but they don't look tiny in the photos at all. And this is what actually fascinates me about the photography, that it can really mess with our brains in the scale of it, because you don't really know how big things are. And also in this series, putting small birds next to huge eggs, it's kind of I think it gets kind of like a dreamlike impression.
Makes me think of Cortege in his later years, trapped in his apartment. You know, what he could do with this window ledge and the objects he had around him. Some of the most powerful work, I think.
Yeah. Very good. You don't need much. You don't even need scissors. You can throw the paper.
Photograph your chewing gum. I'll definitely be looking that up. Zofia Ridder, it's also worth mentioning, she is having an exhibition at the Photographers Gallery in London this October. And we'll also be including some of her work in a larger project at Dalkeith Palace, which Sylwia is also a part of, in 2027. Watch this space. Any other questions?
Don't be shy. Ask the tricky ones.
Shall I ask you one more to fill the gap?
Okay, yeah.
Then we'll call it quits. I gotta go back to my notes if that's all right, because you got away with some of these more difficult ones.
Oh, well, the difficult ones, okay.
Okay, so we've spoken a little bit about this idea of sculpture as part of your work and also your studio practice. If you're creating work and you have an exhibition in mind, I know that some of the works, for example, that we see on the walls here were born out of this project. How does that change your process? Because of course in Lethe we know, at least, there's some time allowed to pass. There's a sort of retrospective thinking that sometimes a work takes a little while to emerge, to complete itself. And then there's a very different experience of, I have a deadline, I need to produce something. Are you able to tell us about sort of what are those two contrasting workflows for you? What does that do to you as an artist?
I think I work quite fast and quite slow at the same time, because obviously the ideas are collected somewhere at the back of a head, but when push comes to shove, then I can produce this work really quickly, because obviously the whole library is in the head, so it's just a kind of question of physically producing the prints, assembling them in the way I want to. Although there are some limitations. So, for example, the work which is in 3 pieces, I had to kind of quite carefully think how to fit it within the 3 pieces precisely, so it kind of like makes sense, because these gaps had to happen in the particular distances, so that it works basically with the shape of the final shape of the light boxes. But also at the same time, it's paper and it's kind of stuck with Japanese washi tape, which you can pull without damaging anything. So it kind of allows you to reassemble things really quickly. So nothing is kind of set in stone. You can move things around, and I guess that's easier in that regard.
I imagine you're in this sort of trance-like state.
Yeah, it's very much. We were chatting about this earlier. That like one of the reasons why I can't listen to any music, because the process is so intense that you feel like someone rang you out at the end of it. So whoever ever edited a video and has all the kind of database of like minute clips that you need to slot in as a B-roll in the proper place, and you kind of like have to remember what's what, knows what intensity of the process is like. So it's a little bit like kind of like having this library constantly ticking over in your head while you're working on things, and it can be very intense.
Because you go through 1,000 versions of what could be before you arrive at what
Exactly.
what
I
is.
mean the versions that could be in my head, and then as my friend says, like you don't know what's gonna be like until you actually start working on this. So yeah.
But you went through an earlier stage of making maquettes of, because I watched you doing, there was like an earlier stage of making maquettes of the, so you went through different waves of.
Oh yeah. Because whenever I have a little bit of a break, like brain space, so like if I go to my mom, obviously she doesn't have the Epson printer at home, so I can't do the finished version. So I'll just go prepare the files and print them, and the local printer kind of who gets the colors more or less similar, and then I can make them on a smaller scale, pop them in my notebooks, and then I can come back to the ones that I kind of think that work better. So that's the way of doing it.
Mm-hmm. So there is something of a sketchbook involved sometimes.
Yeah, but sometimes, mainly when it's a deadline. That's why it worked. That's why I kind of thought that I would like to see if what I have in my head in a way translates in what will be the finished product. And some things I was able to modify in a kind of like printing stuff on like a proper paper. Because again, like I don't like to waste stuff, so it's good, and it's paper, so it's easily recyclable. And this is the kind of, although now as we're getting into another discussion, like can you actually recycle anything?
Okay, last thing, I want to give a shout out to Ludwig, who is hanging just above the stairs there, in case you've missed them.
Oh, yes. It's the result of our workshop with the kids, the primary school kids who came to the gallery.
Well, I thought you were an absolute natural. What was the experience like for you?
It was interesting. I wasn't expecting kids to be that territorial and be so. How to say that? They were basically absolutely mortified when I asked them to destroy something. So the prints, because the plan was that the guys have 2 weeks to take pictures either on the phones or maybe on a compact camera of like their environment. So we arranged like, okay, no faces, just like maybe your pets or landscape, maybe your hands, but nothing that we can identify. So it's kind of more abstract. Plus the plan was that the whole group kind of works on a one piece. So we didn't know, in a true surrealist style, we didn't know what's going to come out at the end, but we kind of were all working towards the common goal. And then when the children realized that they have to, like, someone can take the print of the, let's say, hat and tear it, the emotional response is so strong that you really need to eat a kanapka before kind of continue working, which is Polish lunch. But we got there in the end, and I think it took them good hour to realize that there's a permission to destroy things, to tear through things, to kind of be free, which I wasn't expecting, because I was thinking like if you age 6 to 9, you have all the freedom in your life you can, but actually that's not exactly reality, that you kind of have to allow yourself this, you have to give yourself this permission to kind of go out there and destroy stuff. And until it then becomes this new thing.
There's a very strong sense of ownership, at least in my 3-year-old son. I think it's not a case of you don't understand the concept of ownership. I think it's that you think you own everything. And so if somebody else comes along and destroys something, even if it belongs to them, can be interpreted as, oh my God, my world is ending. So yeah, it was fascinating to watch, but they should be very proud of what came out.
I think so. I think because at some point I kind of felt like, oh, we're doing it way larger than we originally planned, but they kind of rolled with it. So now it's hanging in the gallery, and it's a very interesting piece. I love the little dog at the top. We kind of felt like that's gonna be the kind of anchor point, and then we spread. Although now, because of a space constraint, we had to kind of lop off because there's a handle going, and like there's no way this print huge, because it consists of like 4 parts which are huge to kind of fit it. So it looks now more like a map of Scotland, kind of very abstract one. But it's still kind of like we kept the kind of American plan portrait, so that the legs are no longer there, but we have it from like a thigh up.
I love it. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Sylwia. Very insightful.